I love the company, but as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States.
It's going to hurt Americans. It's going to hurt American jobs. It's going to hurt investments. We've seen the market tumble. I'm sure it's going to start tumbling again.
Ford and John Deere. Pushback. Could tariffs drive an American icon out of the US? The US has recently slapped hefty tariffs on several foreign-made goods, and it's hitting some of the country's most iconic brands hard, including giants like Ford and John Deere. The move has sparked a ripple effect across multiple industries, and now two of America's biggest manufacturing names are pushing back against the Trump administration's trade decisions. So, what's next for Ford and John Deere? Their next moves could shake up the political landscape and possibly make Trump reconsider his strategy. Let's talk about Ford for a second. When you think of Ford, you think of America, just like you do with Apple. Ford Motor Company has been a staple of American industry for over a century. But now, there are growing concerns that economic pressures might force Ford to rethink its long-standing presence in the US. There's no official word yet that Ford plans to leave the US, but there are several factors that could push the company in that direction. Rising costs and tariffs. One of the biggest challenges is the increasing cost of manufacturing. The auto industry depends heavily on a global supply chain. Tariffs on imported parts, especially from Canada and Mexico, are putting a serious financial strain on automakers. Back in February 2025, Ford CEO Jim Farley warned that proposed tariffs could raise vehicle prices by as much as $12,000. That kind of spike would make it much harder for everyday Americans to afford a new car. If costs keep climbing, Ford may have no choice but to move more of its operations to places where manufacturing is cheaper. Trouble competing in the EV space. Consumer preferences are shifting too. American buyers are going all in on electric vehicles, EVs, but Ford is struggling to keep up with Tesla and a wave of competitive newcomers from China. In August 2024, Ford scrapped plans to release a full-size electric SUV in the US, citing profitability concerns and tough competition from lower-cost Chinese automakers. This signals a larger reevaluation of their EV strategy, possibly pulling back investment in the US EV market altogether. Regulatory pressures and labor costs. Then there's the regulatory environment. Stricter emissions laws and evolving labor policies have driven up costs for companies operating in the US. While Ford is trying to meet these standards by investing in hybrid and EV technologies, the high price tag of transitioning to cleaner energy is tough to swallow, especially without strong government support. If other countries offer better tax breaks and subsidies for EV manufacturing, Ford might decide to ramp up production elsewhere. Labor is another big factor. The United Auto Workers, UAW union, has been pushing hard for better pay and benefits, which is great for workers, but raises the cost of doing business. Strikes in 2023 already caused major production disruptions and cost billions. While Ford's relationship with unions is relatively strong, continued pressure for wage hikes could push the company to move some production offshore. Is Ford really leaving the US? Despite these headwinds, Ford still sees the US as a key market, especially for trucks and SUVs, categories where the company continues to thrive. So, is Ford leaving? For now, the answer is no. The company is betting big on hybrid vehicles as a middle ground, bridging traditional gas engines and full EVs, hoping to keep costs in check while meeting changing consumer demands. And let's be honest, Ford is an American icon. A full departure would likely trigger a political and public outcry. Still, if things don't improve, if production costs keep rising and government support remains lackluster, Ford might begin scaling back its US operations and investing more heavily in markets that offer better financial returns. What it all means for the industry. Ford's situation highlights a bigger problem facing the American auto industry. The newly proposed tariffs could reshape the entire landscape. With so many vehicle parts coming from Canada and Mexico, tariffs could either eat into automakers' profits or drive up prices for consumers, neither of which is good for business. CEO Jim Farley's warning about these tariffs wasn't just about Ford. It was a red flag for the whole industry. Automakers rely on efficient cross-border supply chains. Disrupting that system could create long-term instability and hurt both manufacturers and car buyers. Final thoughts. While Ford isn't packing up and leaving just yet, the pressure is real. Trade policies, labor negotiations, rising costs, and fierce global competition are all forcing the company and the industry to make some tough choices. Ford will likely fight to keep its American roots, but don't be surprised if more of its production starts shifting abroad in the coming years. Tariffs, trade, and tough choices. Ford's future in America hangs in the balance. The U.S. administration has introduced new tariffs in an effort to protect American manufacturing jobs. But while the intention is to strengthen domestic production, experts warn that this strategy could have the opposite effect, potentially making American-made cars less competitive globally and forcing companies like Ford to rethink their manufacturing plans. In response to these looming tariffs, Ford is already taking action. The company is reassessing its supply chain to minimize the financial hit. This includes looking into boosting domestic production of key parts and renegotiating supplier contracts to find more cost-effective solutions. At the same time, Ford may have to raise vehicle prices to offset rising costs, a move that could hurt sales in an already tough, competitive market. Ford isn't just making internal changes. It's also talking directly with policymakers. Company leaders are urging government officials to consider the long-term impact of these trade policies. They're emphasizing the importance of maintaining strong trade ties with Canada and Mexico, which are essential to keeping North America's auto industry strong. Some execs have even floated the idea of granting tariff exemptions on certain auto parts to ease the financial pressure without completely scrapping the original goal of protecting U.S. jobs. A perfect storm for the auto industry. These tariff troubles come on top of other challenges already facing the automotive industry. Rising interest rates are making car loans more expensive, which has cooled off demand for new vehicles. Supply chain issues, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, are still disrupting access to crucial components like semiconductors and EV batteries. Ford has been pouring money into its shift toward electric vehicles, a move that requires massive investment. But if tariffs continue to drive up production costs, the company could have trouble keeping EV prices competitive, which might slow the adoption of electric cars in the US altogether. And for everyday buyers, higher prices are a big concern. New cars could become unaffordable for many, pushing people toward the used car market or delaying purchases altogether. Leasing, financing, and dealership incentives could also take a hit, making it even harder for consumers to buy a new vehicle. In response, automakers like Ford may roll out new financing options or extended payment plans to soften the blow. Still, these efforts might not be enough to fully cancel out the higher prices caused by tariffs. A time of uncertainty. As trade policies remain in flux, the auto industry is on edge. Ford and other major manufacturers are watching closely and pushing for policies that support long-term growth without hurting affordability. The next few months will be critical as companies adjust their strategies to navigate these economic headwinds. Ford, for its part, is staying focused on innovation and adaptability. But the challenges ahead will require strategic planning, close cooperation with the government, and flexibility in a rapidly changing market. Consumers and industry leaders alike are keeping a close eye on how it all unfolds and what it could mean for the future of car manufacturing in North America. What if Ford left the US? It's a tough question to ask, but it's one that's on people's minds. What happens if Ford eventually pulls out of the United States? The economic consequences would be massive. Ford is deeply woven into the American economy. The company employs tens of thousands of workers, and its impact ripples across industries, from auto parts to logistics and dealerships. If Ford were to close US plants, it would devastate the communities that rely on those jobs, pushing unemployment up and putting financial pressure on families. A hit to wages would also lead to lower consumer spending, hurting small businesses and local economies far beyond the auto sector. Ford's departure wouldn't just impact direct employees. Many small and mid-sized suppliers depend on contracts with Ford to stay in business. If those disappear, we could see layoffs, business closures, and a deeper economic downturn. Fewer domestic automakers would also mean more reliance on foreign imports, which could widen the trade deficit and weaken the overall U.S. manufacturing base. Bigger than just one company. The fallout wouldn't stop at the job market or supply chain. Ford contributes billions in tax revenue and invests heavily in research and development. Without that, the government could lose critical funding for infrastructure, education, and public services. Ford is also one of the leaders in pushing forward electric and self-driving vehicle technology. If it scales back its U.S. presence, innovation in these areas might slow down, setting the country back at a time when global competition in tech and clean energy is fierce. Would you still stick with Ford? If Ford makes drastic changes or scales back its U.S. presence, would consumers remain loyal? That's a question many are starting to ask. For now, Ford is holding steady, committed to adapting and pushing forward. But the decisions made in the coming months, by both the company and the government, could reshape the future of American car manufacturing for decades to come. Could Ford exit the US? What it would mean for America's economy and auto industry. Losing a major player like Ford would deal a serious blow to the US auto industry. It wouldn't just hurt jobs or local economies, it could also weaken America's position in the global car market, giving foreign automakers the upper hand, especially in new and emerging technologies. Of course, some might argue that Ford stepping back could open doors for other car makers. New players or existing ones could step in to fill the gap, potentially bringing fresh investments and creating new jobs. But any such transition wouldn't happen overnight. It would take years to rebuild that kind of presence, and in the meantime, the economy would face a period of uncertainty and instability. Ford isn't just any company, it's a symbol of American industry. Its roots run deep, and its departure would carry both real economic consequences and emotional weight. If Ford were to reduce or fully exit its US operations, the impact would be massive. Job losses, disrupted supply chains, lower consumer spending, and a decline in industrial output would hit hard. Even if the market adapts over time, the immediate fallout would be severe. As one of the most recognizable names in American manufacturing, Ford pulling back would be a wake-up call, a warning about how fragile US competitiveness can be in a globally connected economy. Ford and Trump, a complicated relationship. Ford's relationship with President Donald Trump has always been a bit of a roller coaster. During his first term, Trump frequently commented on Ford's decisions, even taking credit in 2016 for the company's choice to keep production of the Lincoln MKC in Kentucky, a move Ford later clarified wasn't about plant closures. That moment set the tone for a complicated back and forth between the automaker and the Trump administration. Fast forward to 2025, and Trump, now in his second term, introduced a 25% tariff on imported cars, trucks, and parts starting April 3rd. The goal? Strengthen US manufacturing. But the result? Higher production costs and disrupted global supply chains. Exactly the kind of challenges companies like Ford are now scrambling to handle. Ford CEO Jim Farley didn't hold back, calling the tariffs a source of a lot of cost and a lot of chaos for the industry. Despite these tensions, there were moments of cautious optimism. In early 2025, Ford chairman Bill Ford said he noticed a more informed approach to the auto industry from President Trump compared to his earlier term. He even expressed hope that Elon Musk, a Trump ally and industry heavyweight, might help represent the interests of all automakers, not just Tesla. Still, the challenges didn't go away. Tariffs weren't the only issue. Ford's multi-billion-dollar investments in battery plants across several US states were also threatened by possible changes to tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. Policy shifts like these made Ford's long-term planning even more difficult, highlighting the tricky balance between adjusting to political decisions and keeping their business strategy stable. John Deere and the tariff tug-of-war Ford wasn't the only company caught in the crosshairs. John Deere, another iconic American brand, also found itself at the center of Trump's tariff rhetoric. Even before returning to the White House, Trump was warning of wide-reaching tariffs. He claimed they worked before, and that they'd work again. At one rally, he told a story about John Deere's supposed plan to move production to Mexico, and how he personally threatened to block the company from selling in the US if they went through with it. Trump said, John Deere, a great company, announced a year ago they were going to build big plants in Mexico. I said, if they do that, they won't sell anything here. Yesterday, they announced they're probably not going to do it. I kept the jobs here. The only problem? There's no public evidence that such an announcement was ever made. In fact, when reporters followed up, John Deere told the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg that they hadn't made any recent statements or changed their plans. Trump's campaign didn't offer proof either. Whether it was a misunderstanding or a pressure tactic, it left questions about how much influence, or interference, was really at play. Experts also pointed out that targeting John Deere could end up hurting American farmers more than helping them. If the company's operations are restricted, Chinese manufacturers might swoop in to fill the gap, which would directly contradict Trump's own trade policies and agreements. What's next for the industry? The stakes are high. Trade policies, tariffs, and political pressure are shaping the future of American manufacturing in real time. Companies like Ford and John Deere are navigating a tricky landscape, trying to remain competitive while adapting to regulatory and political shifts. Ford, in particular, faces major decisions ahead. The company is investing heavily in electric vehicles, new battery plants, and future technologies, all while dealing with higher costs and uncertain government incentives. And for consumers, the prospect of higher vehicle prices, fewer financing options, and longer wait times for new cars isn't a welcome one. The coming months will be critical. The decisions made by both automakers and the government could redefine the US auto industry, not just in terms of where cars are made, but also who's making them, how affordable they are, and whether America can keep its edge in a fast-changing global market. Trump, tariffs, and the trouble with targeting US companies. What it means for John Deere, and more. What's happening with John Deere and other American companies is part of a broader pattern. Trump has a history of publicly pressuring companies when it suits his agenda. And now that he's back in the White House, some business leaders are bracing themselves for more of the same. Former Medtronic CEO Bill George put it bluntly, Trump is showing an anti-capitalist mindset. He's targeting companies that haven't done anything wrong. They haven't violated laws or endangered consumers. This isn't how business should be treated. For CEOs, this brings back memories of the unpredictability and high-stakes political pressure they experienced during Trump's first term. A chaotic environment that some feared would return. And now, for better or worse, it has. Trump's long history of calling out companies. Long before he returned to the presidency, Trump had a habit of publicly calling out big-name companies. Back in 2016, while still campaigning, he urged a boycott of Apple because the company refused to help the FBI unlock the iPhone of a San Bernardino shooter. He's criticized Amazon, claiming it was exploiting the US Postal Service, which spooked investors in 2018. He's also gone after Boeing over the price tag of Air Force One, threatened GM for its production choices, slammed Nordstrom for dropping his daughter Ivanka's fashion line, and lashed out at Merck after its CEO resigned from a White House counsel following Trump's controversial remarks about the Charlottesville rally. Even Meta, formerly Facebook, took a hit when Trump referred to the platform as an enemy of the people during a CNBC appearance. He's also threatened lawsuits against Google over supposedly negative news coverage. CNN analyst and Princeton professor Julian Zelizer noted that while past presidents have clashed with industries, Trump's style is far more targeted and aggressive, something rarely seen in modern American politics. According to Zelizer, this kind of pressure creates an unpredictable, politicized environment for businesses, undermining the free market values conservatives typically champion. A bold threat to John Deere. In one of his most dramatic moments yet, Trump surprised many by threatening to slap a 200% tariff on John Deere products if the company follows through with plans to lay off US workers and move some production to Mexico by 2026. During a roundtable with farmers in Pennsylvania, Trump warned, "If you move those jobs, we'll put a 200% tariff on everything you sell in the US. You're hurting our farmers and hurting American manufacturing." That's a heavy threat, and it left economists, business leaders, and policy experts deeply concerned. Experts sound the alarm bell. George, now teaching at Harvard, warned that this kind of tariff would end up hurting the very people Trump claims to protect: American farmers. That tariff would just drive prices up for farmers, he said, adding that John Deere is a model American company that shouldn't be punished for competing globally. Christine McDaniel, a former trade official under President George W. Bush, also criticized the move. If Deere were to cave under Trump's pressure and back away from its international plans, she argued, it would likely hurt its competitiveness on the world stage, leading to lost revenue, shrinking sales, and US job losses. Billionaire Mark Cuban, a vocal supporter of Vice President Kamala Harris, went even further, calling the tariff threat the definition of insane. He warned that it would make it easier for Chinese manufacturers to swoop in and steal Deere's business. Even the Wall Street Journal editorial board condemned Trump's comments. They argued that threatening American companies this way could actually push business leaders toward Kamala Harris, seeing her as a more business-friendly alternative. They also reminded readers that US companies operate in a global market, particularly under trade agreements like the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which explicitly prohibits tariffs on agricultural equipment like Deere's. While it's true, a president can invoke Section 232 to impose tariffs on grounds of national security, using that law to target a single company for business decisions would set a dangerous precedent, many warn. Mary Lovely, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, echoed that concern. Threatening individual companies with tariffs crosses a line. It starts to look less like capitalism and more like government control over private enterprise. And she's right. That kind of move could undermine trust in American markets and damage the principles of a free economy. A pattern that's not new. If all of this sounds familiar, it's because it is. During his first term, Trump's economic policies were heavily protectionist. His administration imposed major tariffs on steel, aluminum, and Chinese imports in a sweeping trade war. The goal was to protect American workers and industries while reducing the trade deficit. In some sectors, those moves did lead to a modest boost in domestic production, but they also triggered retaliation from other countries, especially China, that hit American farmers hard. Suddenly, markets dried up and prices dropped, leaving many in agriculture uncertain about their futures. What could Trump's tariff plans mean for John Deere and US agriculture? If Trump's threats turn into real policies, John Deere could face serious hurdles. With increased production costs, reduced international competitiveness, and uncertainty around trade agreements, Deere might struggle to maintain its global standing. But the bigger impact could hit farmers, the very people Trump often says he wants to help. Equipment prices would likely rise, exports could fall, and small farming communities might feel the pain first and worst. So, what's the takeaway? Trump's return to the presidency brings back his bold, hands-on style of dealing with American companies, a style that blurs the line between policy and personal politics. For some, it feels like a warning sign. For others, a call to realign US industry with national priorities. But one thing's certain, the balance between politics and business is more fragile than ever. So, what do you think? Are these bold moves good for America, or a threat to the country's economy and global reputation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what you think. What Trump's tariff policies could mean for John Deere, farmers, and the US economy. In today's deeply interconnected global economy, any changes to trade policy, especially tariffs, can have big consequences. And that's especially true for iconic American companies like John Deere and the broader agricultural sector it serves. If the Trump administration decides to reintroduce steep tariffs on raw materials like steel, it could dramatically raise production costs for manufacturers like Deere. Those extra costs? they'd likely be passed down to farmers, who already face thin margins and economic uncertainty. That means new tractors, harvesters, and other equipment could become too expensive for many to afford, making it harder for them to invest in modern technology that keeps American farms competitive. Agriculture is part of a global supply chain. When tariffs are introduced, they don't just affect costs, they can restrict market access too. If other countries respond with retaliatory tariffs on American agricultural exports, US farmers could see demand for their products shrink. That hits profits, disrupts operations, and can put pressure on companies like John Deere to cut costs, even at the expense of innovation. Tariffs could undercut innovation and rural economies. When costs go up and markets get shaky, companies often look for ways to reduce risk. One area that often takes a hit is research and development. For John Deere, that could mean scaling back investment in new technology or sustainable farming solutions, both of which are key to staying competitive and supporting modern agriculture. Let's not forget the rural communities that depend on both agriculture and manufacturing jobs. If farming slows down because of trade restrictions, local economies suffer too. Businesses close, job opportunities shrink, and small towns that revolve around the ag industry can quickly find themselves struggling to survive. Companies like Deere are already working on adapting. We could see more localized production, investments in resilient supply chains, and a stronger push into domestic markets. But staying competitive also means staying innovative, and unpredictable tariff swings make that much harder. John Deere has a strong history of adapting to tough situations. But without clear, consistent trade policies, even the most resilient companies can face serious roadblocks. That's why continued innovation, diversification, and a commitment to farmers will be essential to weathering the storm. What happens if major brands like John Deere or Ford leave? Losing companies like John Deere or Ford isn't just an economic issue. It strikes at the heart of American identity. These aren't just companies. They're symbols of innovation, hard work, and the American dream. When giants like these consider pulling out of the US or downsizing operations, the effects ripple far and wide. 1. The immediate economic hit. These companies employ tens of thousands of people directly, and many more indirectly. When a factory closes, it's not just the workers who feel it. Local businesses, from diners to hardware stores to schools, all take a hit because families have less to spend. There's also the matter of tax revenue. Major corporations contribute billions in taxes that fund schools, infrastructure, and essential public services. If that revenue disappears, communities may face budget cuts and fewer resources. 2. A setback for innovation. Big companies drive research and development. They invest in game-changing technologies that smaller companies often can't afford to explore. If Ford slows down its EV development or Deere cuts back on smart farming tools, the entire industry may lose momentum, and America could fall behind on the global stage. 3. A blow to American spirit and global influence. Ford and Deere represent more than just vehicles and machinery. They represent American excellence. If they fade from the scene, it sends a message that America may be losing its edge, and even its optimism. It could discourage new entrepreneurs and allow foreign competitors, especially from China and Germany, to gain ground. The US could also lose influence in key markets as foreign brands fill the gaps, making it even harder for American companies to reclaim their standing later. 4. The emotional cost. For many Americans, companies like Ford are woven into the fabric of the country. Think of the Model T, the open roads, and the pride of Made in America. Losing these companies would feel like losing a part of national history and heritage. Is there a silver lining? Not all is lost. Big shifts in the market can open the door for new businesses, startups, and innovative disruptors to take the lead. These newer companies can be more agile, more creative, and better suited to take advantage of emerging trends. The American workforce is also adaptable. As industries evolve, workers can reskill and shift into emerging sectors like clean energy, automation, or tech. The bottom line: whether it's Trump's tariff policies, global market changes, or shifting manufacturing trends, One thing is clear: losing major companies like John Deere or Ford would have wide-reaching consequences. From local job losses and economic decline to setbacks in innovation and national pride, these are not changes that can be easily brushed off. It's a reminder of how closely business, politics, and people's everyday lives are tied together. Let's keep the conversation going. What's your take? Could America recover from a Ford or John Deere exit? Or would it mark the beginning of a larger shift in global power and economic direction? What's next for Ford and John Deere? The US economy might be feeling the heat from trade tensions and rising costs, but history has shown that every challenge also opens the door to opportunity. So, where do we go from here, especially when it comes to two of America's most iconic brands, Ford and John Deere? Let's break it down. Ford, in the hot seat but not backing down. Ford is definitely feeling the pressure. Thanks to new tariffs, the cost of building cars is rising, and that could force them to raise prices for consumers. And in a competitive market already flooded with electric vehicles and innovative startups, higher prices could make it harder for Ford to stay ahead. But this isn't Ford's first crisis. Far from it. They've been through wars, recessions, oil crises, and global disruptions, and they're still standing. Right now, the company is already making moves to revamp supply chains, boost domestic production, and pivot to meet the moment. Whether that means scaling back in one area or doubling down in another, they're not sitting still. John Deere, tariff trouble on the farm front. On the agricultural side of things, John Deere has its own hurdles to clear. Last year, Trump floated the idea of slapping a 200% tariff on Deere's products if the company expanded manufacturing in Mexico. Deere responded quickly, pointing out that over 75% of what they sell in the US is made right here at home. It was a clear message. They're committed to American manufacturing, but that doesn't mean they're out of the woods. Tariffs on steel and aluminum are pushing up costs for Deere too, especially since those materials are essential to building tractors and heavy equipment. And it's not just the US that's throwing up trade barriers. Countries like China have retaliated with tariffs of their own, including on American farm equipment. That puts Deere's international sales, especially in high-growth markets, at risk. And let's not forget the home front. US farmers are buying less new equipment these days. High interest rates and soft crop prices are making it harder for them to invest. That's already putting a dent in Deere's 2025 sales outlook. Short-term struggles, long-term strength. So yeah, the near-term outlook is bumpy. Rising costs, slower sales, and ongoing supply chain headaches. But don't count these giants out just yet. Both Ford and John Deere are built for the long haul. They've been through tough times before and know how to adapt. Whether it's reshoring production, doubling down on tech and innovation, or pivoting to electric and sustainable solutions, these brands are already taking action. They're not just reacting, they're planning for the future. Still standing strong. It won't be easy. No one's pretending it will be. But Ford and John Deere are so deeply woven into America's economic and cultural fabric that they're not going anywhere anytime soon. They've got the resilience, the resources, and the experience to weather the storm, whatever shape it takes. So bring on the tariffs. These two titans aren't backing down. If you made it to the end, thank you. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the industries and policies shaping our world.